Hey guys, FIDE introduced a new rule to prevent farming. But what's actually about that? That's what we're going to find out in this video. Before we can understand the new rule, we have to understand how rating itself works. Well, if you're a 1500 player and you're playing against somebody with 1000 elo, then the difference between your elos is 500. Well, FIDE says that everything above a difference of 400 elo is counted as 400 elo. So if your opponent is 1000 and you are 1500, then your opponent is rated with your rating as if he were 1100 elo. And if you say you're 2000 elo and your opponent is 1000 elo, the difference between your elos is 1000. But still, your opponent is ranked as 1600. Why is that? Well, the intention is that if you're very high ranked and your opponent is very low ranked, that you can still gain a little bit of elo with each win. Nevertheless, because of the fights for candidate spots, FIDE now changed this rule for Grandmasters above 2650 elo. So this is primarily triggered by Hikaru Nakamura. As you can see in this graph, Hikaru Nakamura played 2 championships, the Louisiana State Championship as well as the Iowa Open recently, and as you can see he played only against very weak players between 1800 and maybe 2100 or 2200, but he is the second best player in the world, ranked at 2815 rating points, so these opponents stand no chance and he won every single game. But their difference in elo is more than 400, so every opponent is rated as if he was 2415. That's why he can gain up to 0.8 points per single game, and of course if you place 11 games, this adds up to almost 9 elo points, and that he can grind or farm slowly quite weak opponents. And FIDE thought that this is not a good idea, that players can actually do this, because at the candidates tournament one spot is open for the best elo. So the best elo player can qualify for the candidates tournament, and of course Hikaru Nakamura is way in front of Fabiano Caruana and is the favorite to win this spot, and therefore gaining another 9 elo points is putting him ahead even further. Well, Hikaru's idea was not actually to win these 9 elo points, but to farm safe games, because you don't only have to have these elo, the highest elo rating, but you also have to play 30 games in the year. And as you probably know, Hikaru is more a streamer than a player, and therefore he hasn't still accomplished these 30 games, and because he tries to prevent having games against very strong players and might losing points, he decided to play weaker tournaments in order to keep his elo safe and basically farm these games quite easily. Well, this is not the first time this has happened. For example, for the last candidates tournament, Ding was the favorite for the spot for the elo, but had only played 4 games due to COVID restrictions, and he reached his 30 games with very small tournaments that actually were not competitive for him, but just grinding the games until he has accomplished all requirements and can take the spot in a candidates tournament. So of course it's strange that people are allowed to basically grind games out of nowhere, and therefore the rule itself makes sense that people cannot grind elo against very low players anymore, but they introduced this new rule for 2650 ELO players, so players that are above, and the reason is that they call it its top 100 level, so only 100 people are in this range, and GMs with slightly lower rating often play in large opens, and they should not suffer from these new regulations because these Grandmasters are very likely to face people lower than 400 ELOs with difference. For example, a player with 2100 ELO, they often face them, and they should not suffer from these new regulations because with this new rule, if you face a player lower than 400 ELOs of yours, then you don't get any points anymore. So that's why they chose this rating, because they say above this rating of 2650 players won't play against weak players anymore. Well, is this a fair rating? In my opinion, it's not, because there are a lot of players between 2650 and 2750 that are not professional players, that don't play in elite tournaments, and that still have to play tournaments the regular way, so opens, and they face quite weak players, and they massively suffer from this. And in my opinion, this new rule should only apply to Grandmasters that actually want to qualify for the candidates tournament. So this would be Hikaru Nakamura, back then Ding Liren, or Alireza Firouzja, who also tried to gain rating with rubbish tournaments. But the reason why most people right now criticize FIDE is not just because of this new rule. It's because it was accomplished without any announcement, and even two famous Grandmasters lost ELO because of this. Well, Daniel Naroditsky and Alexander Bortnik lost ELO because they played such tournaments in Blitz last half year, and FIDE actually decided now to cancel these ratings. So both players won about 30 to 40 points in their Blitz ELO, and they have been quite in the top 10 of the Blitz rating. But FIDE now decided that these ELO gains against weaker players are not right, so they just cancelled all these gain points and set back their progress. And that, of course, is quite unfair in my opinion. Should never, if you have decided something so that a game counts for your ELO, you should not take this back. This is not a fair idea. Instead, you should allow this rule to be applied in the near future, not like today or tomorrow, but maybe starting at the 1st of January or for the next cyclus. But this rule is quite new, and it's not very fair for the new competitions. The issue is known since a few years, and they haven't done something, and now to change a rule quite close to the next candidates is kind of strange, and I don't think it's fair for every participant. For Hikaru, it's not fair because now he doesn't know how to get his 30 games. For Danny Naroditsky and Alexander Bortnik, it's not fair because they lost so much progress. And for all other Grandmasters above 2650, it's just a slap in the face because they play a lot of opens and now they gain hardly any points against weaker players. They maybe only face 3 to 4 players in a 9-round tournament that acquire the standards of normal ratings, so that they're less than 400 ELO difference. So they basically have to win every other games to not completely drop in ELO. And this is of course a rule that is not going to make a lot of friends. In general, the idea is good, but the way they did it is just completely wrong. What's your idea? Just write it back in the comments. And if you have watched till this, subscribe and like. Bye bye.